Welcome back to the program. So Parliament's resumed for a 2-week sitting, and then after that there's one more 2-week block before the end of the year. Plenty of legislation to get through. There's the government's proposal to repeal the Medivac laws. There's its plan to drug test welfare recipients. There's the election promise it made about allowing first-home buyers to put down just a 5% deposit and help them into the market that way. So plenty of issues there, and some of them will prove to be tests for Labor. One other piece of legislation that's due to come into the House this week, at least be introduced this week, is the free trade deals with Indonesia and Hong Kong, and most likely Peru as well. Parliament's Treaties Committee has already looked at the Indonesia and Hong Kong trade deals and largely given bipartisan support to them going ahead. There are many groups, though, who say these are a bad idea, and amongst them is the peak union body, the ACTU. Its president, Michele O'Neill, joins me now. Thanks for your time this afternoon.
Thanks, Stephen.
Why are you opposed to these trade deals?
We're concerned about these deals because, firstly, they're bad in terms of Australian jobs. What they do is open up even more short-term visa workers, where we have 1.4 million people on those type of visas in Australia at the moment. And it's not an opposition to people coming in on work visas, but we think there needs to be testing first to see whether local workers can do the job.
Isn't there that testing there, that labour market testing requirement before you can bring in a foreign worker?
No. So for Indonesia, for example, the largest of the deals, so it has these 3 categories, and it's a bit sneaky. This time what they do is they say they're going to negotiate over the first 3 years of the agreement about bringing in skill shortage visas, and they're the ones that typically there is no labour market testing, and that's the problem because there's an unspecified number that will be opened up.
But do we know that? Because on the reading that I've got of the agreement, it says in Article 12.9 there's no such commitment to allowing more foreign temporary workers to come in. It just says unless the parties otherwise agree, the parties may decide to commence negotiations on that within 3 years.
Yeah, so it's specific about the opening up of those negotiations. Right. What we understand is that that's in some ways, as I said, a bit sneaky, because instead of highlighting the fact that there's going to be this many people brought in at this time, it basically commits the parties to negotiate over 3 years.
But they haven't agreed now to actually allow more.
But there's two other categories where they have. So the other 2 categories they've agreed to is on increases in terms of working holiday visas. Right. To go from up to 4,000, then eventually up to 5,000. And they've also agreed on 1,500 what they're calling training visas. Now, that's pretty extraordinary. Neither of those categories have any testing to see if there's locals that can do the jobs first. And what we know is that, for example, we have massively high youth unemployment in regional Australia. So the idea that we would have opening up of 1,500 new training visas when we've had TAFE decimated, plenty of young people looking for training and opportunities without first giving local people a choice.
Do you accept, though, there's benefits for other sectors, though, in a trade deal like this, particularly the dairy sector at the moment, which is doing very tough in Australia? I mean, their estimates are that they do stand to see hundreds, thousands more jobs in the dairy industry.
Well, this is the problem with how Australia and this government is doing trade deals. We do no independent economic assessment of the benefit to Australia or particular sectors before we sign on the dotted line.
But isn't that what the committee does?
No, it doesn't. Absolutely. So there has been no assessment that says this is the number of jobs that would be driven out of exports, this is the impact in terms of local employment. It's all done on the basis of we assume. And if you look at other agreements we've done and what people like the Productivity Commission have said about it, it said that in previous agreements the impact in terms of the Australian economy has been negligible. So there's this promise that it's going to be good for Australia, but we don't do the hard work. And it's about DFAT sort of corrects their own homework. They do the negotiation and they say it's going to be a good idea, and there's no proper assessment.
But with your concern there about working holidaymakers in particular, are you saying we shouldn't have working holidaymakers at all? I mean, are they taking jobs in Australia?
I'm not saying that. What we're saying is that it should be the case that there is a test, and that test should be, are there local workers able to do the job? And we're in particular parts, and we'll accept in some seasonal horticultural areas, not all, but in some there is a need where you might want to bring in people on short-term visas. But there's two important things to say about that. We've got short-term holiday maker visas working in things like aged care and in hospitality and in sectors where you really have to question whether that's a legitimate need and that it wouldn't be local workers prepared to do it.
Some of these operators, though, like in aged care, struggling to find Australians to fill those positions?
What we hear from the Aged Care Royal Commission is that, of course, part of the problem is how those workers are treated. And what we know when we look at short-term workers, whether it's in the holidaymaker or some of the other visa categories, is we've seen gross exploitation of people who aren't even getting the minimum wage, who in some cases are treated like bonded labour. You know, imagine your boss doesn't only control your pay packet but also your passport. It's a very powerful position to be in. And so,
is there evidence this is happening, though? I mean, we have,
yes, there is.
We have a number of free trade deals that have been in place for some time. Is there evidence that's actually happening?
There's absolute evidence that we have a huge problem with exploitation of workers in Australia on short-term visas. That's been documented. We've seen it in the agricultural sector. We've also seen it in hospitality and retail.
But as a result of free trade deals?
Well, this is the problem, David, in that we're entering into these deals without taking the time to say independently, which is a requirement in many of our trading partners, that it's independently assessed and then it's scrutinised by the Parliament. Not in Australia. In Australia, the Parliament doesn't have any oversight to this. There's no transparency. The deals are done in secret. They're signed. Then there's this committee that says, oh, you know, we don't like this bit about it and what about that bit? But it's too late. The deal's signed. So, and the Parliament only actually looks at some minor technical aspects in terms of the legislation.
Well, I mean, it looks like Labor's given a tick largely, though, to these trade deals. You're saying that's the wrong move?
It's absolutely the wrong move, and we're saying to the Labor Party that they should oppose these deals and to the crossbenchers. And we say that because they also open up these ISDS provisions, these provisions that really allow...
Investor-state dispute resolution. But again, we've had these in previous deals. Is there evidence that they've led to unwarranted legal actions against Australia?
Well, we saw the Philip Morris case where there was the suing of the Australian government on the basis of an ISDS provision for plain packaged tobacco laws, which were, of course, leading the world about trying to do something to reduce smoking rates in Australia. A great public initiative that a company that was going to lose profits as a result cost Australian taxpayers millions and millions of dollars fighting off that action over multiple years in the courts. Recently, we've seen a French company sue the Egyptian government for putting up the minimum wage by $2 an hour. So it is really, and there's no protections in these deals against labour rights changes or about environmental changes too.
There's a protectionist sentiment, you know, creeping around the world as we... Australia relies very heavily on free trade. As an open trading economy, don't we need more free trade deals?
Look, I want to be really clear. We're not opposed to trade. We actually think trade's really important for the Australian economy, for Australian workers. We want to see exports increase so that increases and supports local jobs and businesses that are doing the right thing here in Australia. But it shouldn't be on the back of not supporting local people being able to get jobs when they need to get them. And it shouldn't be on the back of people being exploited either in Australia or in the countries we're trading with. Because you know what? Some of the countries we're entering deals with, let's look at Indonesia, they're in the top 10 of labour rights abuses. They will undercut good businesses here if we don't include strong clauses that say they have to meet ILO standards as well.
A couple of other issues. Labor's having an internal debate about climate change, whether it should just adopt the government's emissions target, as Joel Fitzgibbon suggests, or go for something more ambitious. What do you think?
Well, we think it's really important we keep to the Paris commitments. We think the answer to this has to be in enforceable, strong global commitments about change. And it's also the case that really the government is abandoning their commitment to the future here.
So you don't think their target's adequate?
No, we don't. Absolutely.
So Labor shouldn't support that target?
No.
Stick with a 45% target, do you think?
Well, I think it's reasonable to look at... I mean, we actually support a different target in terms of what the union movement says. Well, our target is about saying that it should go to 30%, but sooner. So we've got a sooner period of time, so it doesn't actually match up to what the party and the government are saying. But also what we're saying is that really the government needs to be investing in jobs for the future, so not putting their head in the sand about what we need to do to create renewable jobs and make sure that there is a long-term plan for young people and the next generation. They just seem to be blinkered in their approach, and we don't support that.
Okay, look, admittedly they did recently win an election, having taken that to the people again. But let me just ask you finally about religious discrimination. There are many aspects to this draft bill, and I'm wondering if you have made a submission and what you think about it. But specifically, there's a requirement for big business to spell out why they need to tell employees to restrict their religious views on social media and so on. You know, the Israel Folau Rugby Australia example's been. Do you, as a union movement, have a view on that?
Yeah, we do. We're concerned about the bill being an overcorrection, if you like, that what it does is privilege religious organisations over the rights of workers to not be discriminated against. So we don't support it. We think it is always wrong to design legislation around one person's circumstance, and we really don't think this bill gets it right.
Do you think there's a need for the bill at all?
Look, the notion that people shouldn't be discriminated against, whether it's because of their sexual orientation or their gender or their religion, of course, is something we support because we don't think people should be discriminated. But to give more power and rights to discriminate to organisations is not the correct way to do it.
Michele O'Neill, ACTU President, thanks very much for joining me today.
Thanks, David.
Appreciate that.